Let's create some Instagram-ready looping motion graphics that anyone, even beginners, will be able to follow along with and learn some incredibly useful techniques. Let's jump right in.
TipTut.
You can download the resources you need for this tutorial from my website, www.tiptut.xyz, and click on the resources page. Hello everybody, and welcome back to TipTut, and welcome back after a while to After Effects. Today we're going to do what seems like on the surface, very simple animation, but one which actually encompasses all of the basic techniques you'll need to make realistic movement in your motion graphics. Essentially, this is an animation theory tutorial disguised as a motion graphics tutorial. So once you've downloaded this little Rube Goldberg setup that we've got here, we're just going to go through this step by step, and we're going to learn about all sorts of things like squash and stretch, arcs of motion, dynamics, things like that, reactive motion, eye tracing, all those sorts of things, whilst making a very cool virtual Rube Goldberg machine. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, download the file, open it up, and follow along with me. Without any further ado, let's just jump right in. So essentially, we're going to create a looping animation here that we can use on our Instagram and things like that. And it's going to be the ball launches into the air, goes through this pipe here, bounces off the two trampolines, lands on this seesaw, flings the other ball over the top of the pipe, which lands back onto this platform. And the ball that lands here is going to gently roll back into this ball's original position so that it loops perfectly. Of course, you can follow along with this, or if you want to, you can make your own Rube Goldberg contraption. Totally fine. Should work exactly the same. But the first thing we need to do is set up our document. So our platform here is going to go up, and our counterweight is going to come down as well. So let's just zoom into this area so we know what we're working with. Let's select my platform, and you can see it's all color coded. So we have our platform and our counterweight right next to each other. And I'm just going to move my anchor points of this platform over to the base here, so that when we rotate and scale and things like that, it moves from that point, which is perfect. So let's press P with our platform and counterweight layers selected to bring up our position keyframes. And we're going to animate this in passes. So we're going to position keyframe both of these, making sure, of course, that we are at the start of our timeline. Let's go over to, say, maybe 1 second. And let's keyframe both of those again on the position. Then we'll take our counterweight, move that down to the bottom of our pipe here, and we will take our platform and move it all the way to the top, something like that. Obviously, we want the ball to follow this. So at your first keyframe, what you can do is take this ball layer here and pick whip it to the platform. And this means that when the platform moves, the ball will move with it too. And I'm actually going to take the anchor point of this ball here and move it to the bottom of the ball, because we will be squashing and stretching this, and we want it to stay attached to the platform when we do. What that means is when we then come to squash and stretch this later, it will stay stuck to the platform as opposed to floating. Now let's add a little bit of easing. We want this to start slow and speed up and then slap into its finished position. So I'm just going to grab my first two keyframes here and hit F9 in order to make them eased, but we're going to leave these other ones linear. Then we're going to go to our graph editor and make sure that we are on the speed graph, not the value graph. And you can see here that we've now got an animation that starts slow and speeds up. And you can see that with the relative dots here along the line. That's the indication of each frame. Let's make it a little bit more extreme by grabbing those first frames here and pulling that influence up to 100%. And now we're going to have much more of a dynamic whipping motion, which is exactly what we need. In fact, I'm even going to drag these handles down to about 6 or 7% so that it does slap into position, but there's a little bit of easing out. It's not going to be too crazy. Okay. With those keyframe positions in mind, let's now make this animation a little bit nicer, because that's fine. That looks okay. You can see what's happening here, but we need some reactions from our other elements. Let's take both of these cogs here, and on the cog top and cog bot, we're going to press R to bring up rotation. We'll keyframe both of those. Let's go to the other end of the keyframe here and keyframe them again. And at this point, we're going to want them to have rotated, let's say 2 times. So we'll just type a 2. Now, obviously, that's going to be quite linear. That's no good. So let's grab both of these keyframes again. Let's F9 those. Go to our easing graph. That's going to be 100% influence. And this one is going to be around 6 or 7, exactly the same as the platform. And now these will spin and speed up spinning, boom, along with the platform's motion. Perfect. Let's add another layer of polish to this little animation here. Let's add in a rotational keyframe. So I'm going to press Shift R to bring up rotation, and we're going to keyframe on the first position. Now, if you notice, there'll be a point here where our line really starts to speed up. You can see on the positional dots on this keyframe, a bit hard to see actually in red, but you can see that they bunch up along the bottom and spread out. At the point where they start to significantly spread out, you're going to want your platform to stop rotating. So I'm going to say around here, we're just going to rotate our platform just a little bit so that as it begins to move upwards, it's almost like it's being pulled by the platform. Let's just press F9 on that first keyframe there, just to make it a little bit easier. Perfect. And then I'm going to say from, as this speeds up loads, we're going to want to push it even further to say about 13. Like this. Boom. Perfect. Okay. At the point where it stops, we want to keyframe again. And then move over just a couple of frames. Let's say 10 frames. And at the moment it's at positive 13. Let's change that to negative 13, which will tilt it upwards. Another 10 frames. Let's change that to say negative 6. About half. Sorry, excuse me, positive 6. Another 10 frames. Let's go to negative 6. Another 10 frames, and let's go to say like 2, and another 10 frames and go to negative 2, and another 10 frames and go to 0. I'm moving 10 frames there. I'm just pressing Control, Shift, and right to do that. And let's grab all of these and just hit F9 on them. Now what we have is a flick to the other side and then a settle. It's going to be way too slow. Boink. Yeah, pretty slow. We don't want that. What we definitely want is this first one to be much shorter. So let's select all those keyframes and let's have it whip. Bam, like that, okay? Now let's grab all of these and just hold Alt, and that will shrink them down to say about 2 seconds and 5 frames. Yeah, that looks much nicer. So now we've had that little extra bit of polish and motion to that. Perfect. Looks pretty good. Let's have, as it bangs to a stop, after say 10 frames or so, let's just have these move back downwards, and they're going to go at a much slower rate. There's no need to have any of the extra rotation or anything. Plus, the user's eye is not going to be looking at it at this point. It's going to be looking at something else. So I'm going to keyframe both the platform and the counterweight's position. Go over, say, 2 seconds. And then I'm just going to copy and paste the original position keyframes so that we know they go back to the exact right position. Then we'll just hit F9 on these starting frames and we'll have a nice, simple little resets back to the way it was. Of course, we can do the same thing to the cogs. We will need to move both of those back to 0. And we can do a nice simple F9 on those as well. Now what we have is a platform that moves upwards, settles into position, and then moves back down at a standard rate. Bam. Let's actually delay that by a second. Move those keyframes with Alt, Shift, and right. And it delays that platform going back down by a second. Bam. Perfect. Now let's look at this ball, because at the moment it's super glued to the platform and that's obviously no good. So let's take our first ball here, and we're going to need, for this one, believe it or not, just scale. So let's keyframe your initial scale at the start frame. And we want a little bit of squash as it starts to speed up. So say from about here, let's keyframe that again. And then as it gets to this point, the last frame before it starts to flick upwards, let's just squash and stretch our ball a little bit. Not too much. We don't want it to be too crazy. Just something like that. And then on the next frame, it will obviously be stretched in a different direction because it started to move up. But what we don't want is this ball, which is currently attached to the platform, to be remained attached to the platform forever. So we're going to hit Control, Shift, and D, and that's going to split that layer into a new ball, and then we can unattach from the platform. It's going to use all of the same animation from previous. It'll be in exactly the same place. And we can now start looking at moving this ball into the pipe. Okay, so let's first of all go back to our scale, and we'll just unlink those so that we can set it back to normal 100 and 100%. So we now have a perfectly normal ball. Then let's bring up all of our keyframes by pressing U. And that's going to bring up our scale keyframes. And if we click this stopwatch here, it's going to turn all those keyframes off. So we're working with a completely blank slate. Press P to bring up your position. Let's keyframe here. Let's go 10 frames. And again, we're not worrying about the speed at the moment. And let's move it to the top of an arc. say around here, and another 10 frames, and let's move it to the bottom of the arc, halfway into this tube, like so. Grabbing your pen tool and clicking one of these points, you'll notice we'll change it from a angled arc to a arc that has control handles, which will allow you to change the position and the angle of your ball's movement and inertia. If you'd like to move these points around, just go to the selection tool and do that. The pen tool is good for adding points and changing points, whereas the selection tool is good for manipulating existing points. Let's press Shift R to bring up our rotation, because you can see our ball is rotated at the moment. Let's rotate it to 0 degrees, and it was at 13 because it was obviously previously attached to the platform here. So we've now got this nice bit of movement. Doesn't look too realistic at the moment, obviously, because we haven't done any good animation to it. And it looks a little bit sharpish, okay? So what we mean by that is it goes too cleanly. At the moment, that's because it's not following the correct physics of the launching off the platform. So it's got a lot of energy coming off this platform, and then it's taking 10 frames to get where it needs to go. So instead, what we'll do is we'll reduce those amount of frames. Boom. Then 10 frames to land into that next bit seems right. We need to slow down at the stop of this arc as it reaches the top. So we're going to hit F9 at the top of that arc, and you'll see it's just moved all those dots for us. It's grouped them at the top of this arc. So as it flings off, it's going to settle in the middle and then land again. But it's actually coming to a complete stop, which obviously would never happen. So let's select these keyframes. Let's go to our graph editor, and you'll notice that the speed keyframes here have a sudden increase of speed. Perfect. Then it slows down to a complete stop. Not so great. Then it increases in speed again before slowing down and clonking into the pipe, which is what we want. To stop this complete stop, we can just grab this middle keyframe here and move up the position of it. And this is actually affecting the overall speed. So we'll grab both of those and move it to 1000. Now you'll notice that it doesn't stop at the top, but it does slow down. What we do want, however, is it to speed up again at the end. So let's just drag that up a little bit. And now we've got, boom. Whoop, nice. Starting to settle in a bit nicer. Okay, let's take a look at that. Looking a little bit better. Well, now the path itself doesn't look too realistic. We need to just play around with these handles a little bit. And obviously it's coming quite close to the edge of the screen. Like realistically, it should probably come up here, you know, and we can make this just a little bit taller for our platform. But we don't want it to go off the edge of the screen. So we will leave it on screen like that, just at the very edge. And to make this look better, of course, we'll need to adjust the timing of this until we get something that we're happy with. That's looking a little bit better on the release, but way too slow as it approaches the pipe. Nice. And of course, the other thing is, as well, we haven't done any squash or stretch or rotation or anything like that. So let's bring up our scale and rotation by just pressing with like, you know, your position keyframes up, just hold Shift and press S and R to bring up scale and rotation. And we want the ball's rotation to always be aligned with the path of motion. And let's squash and stretch it quite a bit, quite significantly, because it's moving rather fast. And let's align that with 3 there. As it comes up to the top here of its arc of motion, we're going to want it to be following the path still. So we're going to rotate it all the way around the path. But it would have slowed down to the point where we can probably actually just reset it back to 100 scale. And now we've got, see how your rotation here is moving too quickly? You can just come back and you can tweak your rotation keyframes so that it reaches that point later, or you can obviously play with easing. Wash, that looks okay to me. And it's going to land in the pipe like that. Let's actually pop that there. And that's a little bit easier to work with. The other thing as well is this actually be a lot easier to work with if the anchor point was in the center of the ball, where it's on the bottom because we split it from the previous ball layer. So I'm actually going to select all of these keyframes and making sure I'm over one of the keyframes, I'm going to press Control, Alt, and Home. Now that's going to move the anchor point to the center without affecting the path of motion, and it actually allows us to be a little bit easier with our landings. Let's go back to our scale options here, and we want that to ease out at the center of the arc. So now we have, whoop, looking a bit nicer. It still rotates pretty fast, so let's slow that down because this ball is actually going to disappear at the point, so it doesn't really matter. Ooh, nice. So that's coming up. It's reaching the top of the arc there and then speeding up again, which is what we want. Still looking a little bit unrealistic though. And I think that's because we need to actually just increase the extremity of that ease a little bit. Nice. That looks much nicer already. Pop. Pop. Lovely. Awesome. Let's leave that for now. Of course, you can tweak to your heart's content. And I'm just going to retweak this ending position here so that it hits perfectly on the tip of that pipe. So let's see what we've got so far. Very nice. Perfect. Let's just increase that a couple frames. Very nice. Okay, great. Now, at the point where this ball hits the pipe here, I'm going to split this layer, Control-Shift-D. I'm going to delete the excess. I do not need it. What we're actually going to do is something clever, a trick with this pipe in order to create a fake ball that's going through it. To do that, we're going to duplicate this pipe here with Control-D, and that's going to give us pipe 2, but we'll rename that as pipe ball. And we're going to use a trim path to make it look like the ball is going through the pipe and do all the hard work for us. I'm going to twirl down this layer and click Add, and I will choose a trim path. Okay, now let's go and take this stroke color. We move back a few frames. Let's take this stroke color and eyedropper the ball. Then we will take that and we'll darken it up a little bit. Let's make it something like... That looks pretty nice to me. Let's do something like that. Okay, and we're going to pretend that this ball is going through the pipe. Take your trim path by twirling it down and put the end of that path at, say, 1%. Okay, and you can see that's going to make the end of the path really, really slim. Let's actually put that start position up to 1%. So we've got it at 99%. So we've got it at the other end of the pipe. Then in your content of your layer, twirl down group 1, you'll see stroke 1. Twirl that down and change the line cap from butt cap to round cap, and you'll end up with a ball, which is very useful. Now, all we're going to do to make this travel through the pipe is we're going to keyframe on the exact frame that we need. We're going to keyframe the start and end of the path. Then moving along, say, 20 frames, we're going to keyframe again. And we will start to pull our ball through the pipe to the point where that goes down to 1%, and we end up with the ball at the other end of the pipe. And because they're equally spaced, we actually get 1% of the ball's movement moving through the pipe. Now, let's trim this layer with Alt and open square bracket at the point where the pipe enters. Let's go to our last keyframe, move back one and trim it again so that we now have a ball that lands, hits the pipe, travels through it, and then disappears as it's being spat out of the pipe, like so. Okay, so let's take a little look at the speed and see if that works nicely. Bit slow. Let's watch it in situ. Oh, very nice. Nice but slow. Let's try 10 frames. That is almost perfect. Bosh. What I want to do though is to slow down just a little in the middle. So I'm going to grab these keyframes. We're going to hit F9 on those. And then we're going to go to our speed graph, and we just want it to slow down ever so slightly. So let's zoom in and we'll grab these and we'll just pull them up, or down in this case, but it's actually just a mirror. It doesn't matter, to the point where, yep, it's going to slow down a little bit in the center there, but then it's going to speed up again as it exits. Perfect. And then let's have a look. Boom. Very nice. Okay, it doesn't look very reactive at the moment. Like I said, we work in passes here. We have our ball position animated, and then we go back and we animate the rotation and the scale. We can do the same thing for this pipe, okay? Let's press U to collapse those down, and let's pick whip our pipe ball layer to our pipe layer. On the pipe layer, let's use our pan behind tool up here to drag the anchor point down to this central curve. Then we're going to bring up position on our pipe layer. We're going to bring up a rotation on our pipe layer, and I think that'll do for now. Let's keyframe both of those. Let's move over, say, 20 frames and hit position and rotation again. Then in the middle, let's go to position and we'll just select our pipe and we will move it down. That's going to create a little bit of a dip, bonk, as the ball hits the pipe and travels through it. we will F9 that middle keyframe so you get a nice dunk like that. And then let's hold Alt on these keyframes so that we can get something that we think works nicely. That works pretty good. I want to ease that last keyframe there too with F9, but not the start one because we want to slap into it, okay? Now, we're happy with that downwards positional movement. Now, as the ball hits, I think that would cause the pipe to rotate back slightly, let's say -3 degrees, or forward slightly, let's say 3 degrees, because the ball's going to hit it boink like that, okay? Then we're going to have it go back to -3 degrees, and it's going to spit the ball out. So let's do that a little bit more extreme. Let's go to, say, 6 degrees on this first one. Let's go to -6 degrees on this one. Then 3 degrees on the next keyframe. And we'll have it take just a little bit longer to go back to 0 and its settling point there. And then for all of these, except for, of course, the first one, we're just going to hit F9. And then we've got a nice bouncing motion like so. Let's see what I do. Now let's look at that in situation. Very nice. Sinks, pushes in. I think, however, that might be a bit much. It's going to have to sink like that and then spit it out. So boom. Lands. Let's try it the other way around like my initial plan was. Let's have it sink -6 that way. 6 here. -3 on that one. And then 0. That looks much nicer because the weight is hitting the ball there. It's going to spit it back out like that. Awesome. So now let's just duplicate our original ball. So we've got it here. Press U to bring up all the keyframes and turn them all off. Reset that back to normal with 100. And then we can bring that ball, excuse me, we can stretch that ball. We can bring that ball over here to the edge of the pipe. Make sure that its rotation is set to 0. So we've got a clean slate to work with. And we can have that ball spit out onto the next platform. Let's have a little look. Boing. Very nice. Okay, let's continue. We need now paths of motion bouncing down off of these platforms onto the seesaw, okay? So let's bring up our position keyframes and do so. Let's move over 10 frames and let's move our ball. Excuse me, I keep stretching it, it's too far away. And have it land at the bottom of this trampoline. So this is going to stretch and bounce downwards like so. Let's move another 10 frames and it would go to, say, the peak of its motion, maybe like here. Another 10 frames and it's going to land on this second trampoline. Another 10 frames and it's going to be at this motion's peak. Let's say somewhere like that, trying to get the angle right that it comes off of this platform here. And then another 10 frames and it's going to land donk right there onto the seesaw. With my move tool, I can obviously adjust these arcs so we get something that looks a little bit more natural. It's not going to fall in these like big straight lines, and this certainly isn't going to act like this. If you hold Alt, you can adjust a single arc of the arm as well. So let's do that so that we get a nice sharp point on this one. If you go to the pen tool and select a point, it will obviously change it from its current form to its other form. So that's either curved to linear, which can be oftentimes a simpler way of creating those hard, sharp points like that. That one also needs to be a sharp point, and this one here might as well be as well because it's going to slap into that. That looks like a pretty decent arc of motion to me. Let's have a little look at what it looks like. Boing. Not too bad, not too bad. Let's move it into the correct position. So that ball is going to exit at this frame here, like so. And then let's trim our layer and move it into the perfect position where it's going to get spat out over that ball. Then we can trim that down a little bit more and we have nice, a perfect ball being shot out of our pipe. Up through the pipe, spitting, bouncing. Perfect. It's coming out a little bit fast there. So let's actually take all of these and stretch them out a bit, because it's obviously lost a bit of inertia going through the pipe, and then it speeds up almost. That looks quite nice, actually. So, boom. Boom. Awesome. So now we have here, coming into this section, bam, boing, boing. That looks quite nice on that first arc. Then it kind of speeds up. You'll notice here, that's quite slow, and then it speeds up here. And if you look at your arcs, you will notice the rough gap between each of the points on this side of the arc is much longer than the rough points and the gaps on this side of the arc. So what you can do to fix that, if you think it's an issue, of course, is just to move these points. And you can see that affects the amount of dots per section, because it's the amount of frames. So if you've reduced that, it's going to now have boing, a similar speed, and it's going to gain a little bit. Boing, boing. There you go. That looks a little bit more natural. I think, however, it would be better if we slowed this down, because we want gaps here that are slightly shorter than the gaps here, because it's lost some inertia, which means that we're going to have to extend this so that those gaps are the same length. And let's look at that. Yeah, see how now it looks like it's slowing down a little bit? So it's not actually the amount of time in between each frame, because the space that it's moving through might be different. So you might actually end up with longer sections, like so. Boing, boing, boing. Awesome. See there, it's kind of speeding up again on the drop. You'd want to fix that by evening out those frames. Okay, that's looking better. Continue tweaking this until you're roughly happy with it, and then you can start adding in a little bit of easing. So for example, here, as it hits the basket, you're obviously not going to want it to come to a complete stop like it does there, but you could select these frames and do what we did before, where we take these bottom frames and just change the easing ever so slightly by bringing them up. So now it will slow down into that gap. Boing. See how there's like a couple of frames which are really close together? Boing, boing, like that. Here, you're not going to want it to stop really. That looks nice. So then let's do the same thing here on this keyframe. We will F9 that one and bring that up to, say, even less of a stop, but still a portion of it. Boing, boing. And here at the pinnacle of this arc as well, we're going to want it to slow down ever so slightly. Something like that. So then it looks like it's speeding up as it drops. Very nice. Of course, we continue to tweak this to your heart's content. I'm going to leave it there because otherwise this tutorial is going to be 3 hours long. Boom, that looks quite nice. That needs to go a touch quicker overall though, so we can just bring those in. Very nice. Boing, boing. Awesome. And of course, now we go back and add the scale and rotation keyframes to this. So let's make sure that our first rotational keyframe is lined up. Let's keyframe that. At this point, when it reaches the bottom of its arc of motion here, you're going to want to have it follow. So we'll have that rotated so that it bounces out correctly. And then as it follows this path out, you just want that to follow so that all your squashing and stretching looks decent enough. So let's rotate it that way. Obviously at the moment you can't really tell. You can also go and do tricks to make this follow the path of motion and stuff like that. But I find in the long run, it's simpler to just quickly go through and do it. Because at least you know then that you're understanding the motion that it's taking rather than relying on the computer to do it for you. So then let's tweak, or finish tweaking rather, this guy. Like that. And he will finish on a 90 degrees. And that's totally fine. And then we can come through and add our scale. So obviously it's going to come out quite fast. So let's stretch that up quite a bit. And remember that the amount that you stretch it one way, you should decrease it roughly the other way. So it's going to come boop, popping out of there. That's probably a bit too much. Let's do 115 and 85. There we go. As it's going to slow down, it's going to maintain speed and therefore squash and stretchiness all the way up until the point that it hits the bottom of the arc. So we actually want a scale here. Then on the next frame, or let's move it one frame forward. On the next frame, we want the scale to switch. So let's do 85 and 115 the other direction. And that's going to squish it there. Then it's going to launch back into its own shape here. So then let's do, see what 100 looks like, because it has slowed down at this point. Boing. Notice that. I think it would then start to stretch again as it drops. Not much, but enough. Let's this time do the point before impact, and let's do, say, 110 and 90. So we've decreased that by 5, basically 5%. And then that would mean the next one here is 90 and 110. And you can see how doing this in sections rather than trying to do this all at once really allows you to focus on one thing at a time, which means you're less likely to make a mistake. Let's have that scale back this way. And then just as it drops here, it's going to hit this carousel. Let's have it one frame forward, keyframe the scale. And let's do let's do 90% width and 110%. Sorry, 90% height and 110% width. And then, bosh, as it hits there, we're going to split this layer because this animation is going to be done, which allows us to bring up all the keyframes for this, undo them all. So there's, once again, nothing on it, and move the anchor point down to the bottom because it's now attached to the seesaw. So we can reposition it slightly, move the anchor point, or let's leave it in the center for now, but we will split the layer and perhaps we'll fix it later. We will, however, bring up our scale, and then let's move over, say, 5 frames, and we'll make this 105 and this one 95. Then move over 5 frames. We'll make this 98 and 102. And then 5 frames, and we'll make it 100, 100 on the scale. So we've got decreasing amounts of scale just so that it bounces boing, into position, boing, like that. And obviously we'll move the seesaw and things. So let's have a little look at that. Okay, so boing, you can see that it does feel like it's stopping or not stopping in the correct locations boing, as it's speeding up. So let's try adding a little bit of slowdown here. As you can see with this as well, this is just a tweaking process. You need to go through and just tweak things until you find you're happy with them. So there it feels like it's speeding up a little bit too much at the top of this arc. So let's just tweak that. And you should get this nice smooth kind of arc looking, you know, the arcs that are here in your position should be similar to your speed arcs as well. Doing, that looks nice. Doing, that looks nice. Doing. And then there it's kind of speeding up too much. So maybe we actually need to increase until we get a nice bump. That I think looks nicer. Much nicer. There we go. So you can see how our arcs of motion or arcs of speed here match our arcs of motion here. Nice. Not perfect, but it'll do for now because otherwise we'll be here all day. Let's look at everything we've done so far. Bosh, plonk, boink, boink, boink. Kind of gets spat out of that tube a little bit quickly, doesn't it? So let's take all of our things here and just give ourselves a few more frames to work with. And then of course we can just push that over. Boink. Yeah, looks nicer. Awesome. That looks much nicer like that. So let's now do these trampolines. And these ones are really easy, don't worry. So we'll find the point where the ball sinks to its lowest here. Okay. And we'll go over to our trampoline layer. Let's grab our pen tool, which allows us to select just the middle point. And we can now start manipulating this, as you can see. So it should all be set up for you in the document. Let's go to this trampoline right here, go to the contents, twirl it down until we find the path, and we can keyframe the path. Then I'll go back to the point where it starts to touch it, we'll keyframe the path. And now we can, with the selection tool, grab this middle point and drag it down and adjust the handles until it looks nice and taut on the ball. Then let's go over, say, 5 frames, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we'll just have that follow, boing, and change the angle so that this looks like a straight line between the ball and the trampoline. 5 frames, tweak it back in the other direction, but now this time a little bit less, and we'll just straighten it up a bit as well. Another 5 frames, let's go that way. Another 5 frames, let's go this way a little bit. Another 5 frames, let's go this way a tiny amount. Again, tweak it up. And then let's copy this first keyframe, paste it so it's back to its original position. And then let's F9 all of those except the first one. Boing. And now we have a trampoline that's going to sploosh back into position. And let's see what that looks like. Very nice. Let's do the same thing on the next one. These are super easy. You'll be pleased to know. So I would say about here, we need the next trampoline. So let's go trampoline left, twirl that down onto the path and keyframe that path. Then let's zoom in so we get a bit more accuracy and find the frame where it's at its lowest point. Let's actually reposition that 1 frame earlier then so that we've actually got some time for this to move correctly. And let's pull it into position and adjust the handles like so. 5 frames. Again, we're going to follow the ball, and it should never really extend further than it did on the first one because that's not how inertia works. Then let's go to a little bit less like that. And a little bit less like that. And a little bit less like that. This angle is actually pretty good, which shows that I did the arc of motion not too badly. Copy that first keyframe, paste it, and grab those and hit F9 on all of them, and then take a look at what we've got so far. Looking very nice. Boing. Looking back, it seems that this might be traveling through the pipe here a little bit fast. So you could come back and just tweak that by extending these by holding Alt by about, let's say 4 frames. I'm going to do the same thing here. 4 frames. That looks nice. And then that would mean, of course, 1, 2, 3, 4, pushing these 1, 2, 3, 4, and then pushing all of these frames as well by 4. And of course, we now need to extend this layer out. Yeah. That looks pretty good. That does, however, change the initial trajectory of this ball. So on the first frame, we just need to tweak him upwards a little bit, like so. Perfect. Now, as that ball hits here, let's do the last bit of this seesaw. So we have this ball, which is now attached to the seesaw. We are going to maintain leaving its anchor point at the center, I think. Let's press U on all of our layers to just twirl them all down so it's not as difficult to work with. And then this ball here, we definitely want to pin to the seesaw so that as we rotate our seesaw, that ball stays attached to it. Okay. And for the seesaw, let's just take our pan behind tool and we'll change this anchor point just to be a little bit lower. Let's bring up a rotational keyframes move over, say, 3 frames, and this is just going to slam into the floor like this. Bosh. Let's see if that looks slammy enough. Bit slow, to be honest. 1 frame less. That's nice. Bosh. Awesome. We will worry about this ball in a moment because that's the last bit. So we'll turn it off for now. And what we want here is the seesaw to slam like that. And then slowly, let's say maybe over 20 frames, have it return to the other side, positive 13 degrees, or let's do slightly more so that it hits and touches the floor. There we go. That's nice. So that's going to slam and then return to its original position. Okay. And as it returns to its original position, the ball is going to roll across it. So let's see what that looks like. Very nice. Flick and roll. Cool. So as this is attached, our positional keyframes here are going to be just really easy. We'll just hit P. We'll go along, say like to the point where it's just past equilibrium, and we'll position keyframe. Then we'll move over a few frames and we'll just have the ball, literally just by pressing the directional buttons, bump over. Then it would start to move a bit further in the same amount of time. And what I'm doing here is just making sure that my ball lines up with the little bumps so that it actually looks like it's rolling. For example, we need a keyframe here so that it touches the seesaw again before we have another keyframe where in the same amount of time it's moved now all the way over to here. We'll actually need a bit more time in our composition. So let's go up from 5 seconds to say 7 seconds or so. And we'll just grab all these layers and extend them. And do the same thing for these layers here. So then we've had it travel there. It's going to bump up. It's going to travel across this little lump. Going to bump down the little lump. And then just about be in the perfect original position. And we'll ease that one. So now we've got this. Okay. Let's just tweak that where it goes. And if you wanted to, you could, of course, F9 those. There, that looks nice and snappy. So let's take a look at what we've got so far. Hop, boing, doink, doink, doink. Boom, 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 boom. Very nice. This, however, I just accidentally extended all the way, which is not what we want. We want pipe ball to extend to the point where it gets spat out. That was my mistake there. Awesome. Let's turn on our final ball. And then obviously here, as it gets flung through the air, we just need one final arc of motion on this ball here. So let's do position. Let's do 10 frames and we'll move it. And I want this to go over the top of everything. Another 10 frames and we'll, oops, stretch it like crazy. We'll position him back down here. And this is going to be a heavy ball. So it's going to bosh and then just roll over. So we'll deal with that in a second. For now, let's deal with this arc of motion here. We want it to be nice and clean, being launched at the correct angle. Let's go to the center and adjust that. This is going to get really rocketed out. It's going to have quite a steep arc, I think. Something like that. It's going to slow down in the middle, but not to a complete stop, obviously. Maybe something like that. And it's going to go bosh, bonk. Let's have a look. That's actually not a bad speed. Awesome. Let's use that as a starting point. Okay. Let's press Shift, S and R, bring up scale and rotation. We want the rotation to be following our arc. So at this point, it would have gone to practically a full negative 90 degrees. And then by this point, we'll have it just be negative 180. That just allows our scale to move properly. And of course, at this point, it's going to go from absolutely nothing, standard squash. In one frame, let's have it squash quite dramatically to like 120% width. And let's do 80% height, like that. Because then on the next frame, when it's like here, we'll have it properly squashed and stretched like that. Vroom. Because it's flinging through the air. By this point, maybe it's squashed a little bit less. And then by this point, obviously here, it's going to be even more dramatic. And let's just go through, and before it hits, let's make sure that the alignment's working pretty well. Because you don't want it leading too much, otherwise it looks unnatural. And then right here, let's have it go 100, 100, and we'll split it. Okay, so now we have this launching ball here. Boink. See how there it looks like it's leading on the rotation, but because it's turning like too early. This needs to be on the rotation later a little bit. Like that. Boing. I think here, let's have it much less squashed and stretched. Let's actually try putting it back to 100. See what that looks like. Yeah, that looks nice. And then let's not have it be as extreme. Let's do 90 and 110. Boink, like that. And then on this one, it's the next ball. So we'll do all the squash and stretch there. Boing. Boing. So that's being launched into the air, flung, landing into position. Now this bit's super easy for, we just want the position and the scale. So what we're going to do is press U to bring up all our keyframes, undo them all. Then we will pin the anchor point to the bottom of the ball, like so. And then with a quick position, let's say it takes a second, like all the energy has just been spat out of it to get to its original position. And you can do a quick check to see if it's going to look the same by just clicking the first frame. And you go, yep, that's pretty accurate. It's going to loop quite nicely. Let's do F9 there, and it's going to really slow down. So let's go from like a quick motion to a slow one. It's going to boing. Like that. Nice. It probably would bounce more, but I quite like the idea of it just slapping into it like this. So let's press scale and let's really squash them. Let's just bloom. And then let's go up, say 10 and squish them, another 10 and squish them, another 10. Well, that should be not that extreme width. Let's do 105 and let's do like 95. Then here, let's do 98 and 102. And then let's have it overshoot a bit so it doesn't all stop at the same time. And let's go 100, 100. And then we'll just F9 those. Bam, it's going to slam there. And let's have it do a little jump actually. And then obviously it's not going to stop like that. Let's reposition that. Just because it looks a little bit unnatural, like slapping down that hard. And let's flatten that. Then let's move that one back a bit so that we can have that last little bit of motion. With no point to it, obviously. so that it just falls into position here. And this one's taking a lot of tweaking because it is quite unnatural. So if you're going to do it, you've got to stylize it a bit. Boing. Nice. Let's then increase that. Nice, there we go. So let's give it then perhaps, let's not give it any time to breathe. Let's trim that by pressing N there over the 6-second mark. Trim comp to work area. That gives us 6 seconds to be working with, and we'll just drag all these layers over so that they don't get clipped off, like so. And let's have a little look at what it is we have done. Oh, excuse me. Hit the microphone there. Monk. Awesome. One last thing we forgot is that the seesaw needs to either start in this position, which probably seems more natural to me, to have it rotational of 18, was it degrees? Yes. So let's have it start off at a rotation of 18 degrees, like that. And then we will need to just position this ball at its starting position here, which is this one need to just be tweaked. Pop. And I believe it is this ball. Is it this ball? Nope. One of these balls, ball 2. This ball right here, ball 2, needs to as well at its starting position. I see it's the same ball. I'm a fool. I'm a fool for this ball. There we go. I thought I split it, but I didn't because there was never any point. Let's now take a look at that. Boing, 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 slap, boing. Perfecto. I think this ball moves ever so slightly from the last frame to the first frame. So we can fix that by taking this layer here and copying and pasting the position value. So that's 1574 by 933. And we can go up to the last position of this ball here and doing whatever the same value was. I'm an idiot. I believe it was 933. But however, it's important to know that obviously this ball here, 933.5, and this ball here are going to have different positional values. So best thing to do is just to tweak and eyeball it until you get something that doesn't move too much. Like that, perfect. And then let's go to the first position here and the last position and see it's just a little bit too far over. So we'll just move that. There you go, much easier than trying to copy and paste values across different shapes. Clunk, spit, bounce, boink, ding, 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 ding. Awesome. And there you have it. So you can see how a lot of these principles are super duper simple, but they just combine together to create some really nice looking animation, which has some great looping effects. People love that sort of stuff on Instagram and stuff. Excuse me, I keep hitting the microphone. And hopefully a fun way to get back into the world of motion graphics if you've been away for a while as well. Lots of cool techniques in here, lots of fun stuff, all based on really simple principles. So thank you very much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I know it's a bit of a long one, but sometimes it's good to go into in-depth thought processes. And hopefully I'll see you next time for another episode of TipTut and a bit more motion graphics. See you then. It's once again time to thank my level 2 and above members, without whom this channel would not be possible. They are delightful people, and if you too would like to be delightful, you could also click that join button below for exclusive perks and benefits.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.